Welcome back, Pokemon trainers, to the 2020 Portland Regional Championships. My name is Gabby Snyder, joined here by Len Duel after a crazy top four game between Gavin and Bingji.
It was a great match.
It was an incredibly great match, and hopefully we have more of those to bring to you as we whittle down the field to the final two trainers. We are now going to be featuring the top four match of Steven versus Joseph, and both trainers are running very different teams, so I'm really excited to see how this matchup's going to play out.
Yeah, Joe probably playing the most defensive team in our top 8 today, that really bulky Yveltal offering things like Snarl. And then on the other side, Steven's team, one of the more aggressive. That Kangaskhan and Tornadus only maybe rivaled by the Psychic Spam team as the most aggressive team in the top cut. And so this is definitely a match of offense versus defense. And they're off to a quick start. Yeah,
they are off to a quick start. And just for a little bit of a recap, we're going to have Joseph on the bottom side of your screen, bringing that team of Groudon, Yveltal, Incineroar, Tapu Koko, Metagross, and Venusaur, with Steven on the top part of your screen, running a Kangaskhan, Tornadus, Incarnate, Kyogre, Amoonguss, Incineroar, and Xerneas team. The leads are coming out onto the field, and Joseph is starting things off with the Tapu Koko and the Metagross against Steven's lead of a classic Xerneas and Amoonguss pairing.
Yeah, I think this is one of the more offensive ways Joe could come out, and that's probably a good thing when you see the Xerneas on the other side. It's going to be difficult for him to use the Yveltal while the Xerneas is out there. It'll be interesting to see if he brings it to the games at all, or if he tries to first deal with the Xerneas and then come in with the Yveltal. Steven leading the Xerneas is helpful for a game plan like that, where if he does Geomancy immediately, then you're probably going to be able to eliminate it, and as long as you can do that before Yveltal has to hit the field, then you can really get good value out of Yveltal.
Yeah, and I like the pairing of the Tapu Koko with the Metagross as well from Joseph's side of the field, just because that means the Amoonguss is forced to not only protect here, but can't go for Spore once it starts attacking in a future turn. Joseph wasting no time, going immediately for that Alolan Guardian of Alola Z move, and going to look for some big damage onto one of the two Pokemon on Steven's side of the field, but because they both protected, it's just not going to do that much at all. Probably looking to try and KO this Amoonguss here with a combination of this Z move and maybe an Iron Head from that Metagross on his side of the field.
Yeah, probably looking, hoping that Steven would just go immediately for the Rage Powder plus Geomancy play, and this would allow him to eliminate the Amoonguss and then have the healthy Metagross ready to threaten that Xerneas. Instead, he just burns the Guardian of Alola and makes it much more difficult for him to actually get through this Amoonguss health bar. Now it's free to Rage Powder away the things Metagross tries to do, and Tapu Koko can go for a Nature's Madness.Maybe that's enough with the little bit of chip here. You didn't get the big Nature's Madness, but the small one will do. But if it misses the KO, then that's an extra turn of attacks that will have to go into Amoonguss.
Yeah, you have to wonder what Joseph's priority is here, because if he's worried about the Amoonguss, I agree that attacking into it with both of these Pokemon would be the correct play, but Joseph also has the option of going for a Light Screen here, which would definitely mitigate a ton of the damage that this Xerneas could have brought to the field, provided we see the Geomancy play here. We see the Iron Head outspeed the Xerneas because it has not Geomancied yet, and get the KO on the Amoonguss thanks to some help from a Nature's Madness. So even though this Xerneas is able to use Geomancy quite comfortably, still sitting at full health, unless Steven leads something that can immediately deal with the threat of this Mega Evolved Mega Metagross, it's going to be facing a uphill battle.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this is the trade he was looking for on turn 1 when he went for the Guardians of Alola plus Iron Head. And the good thing about the Guardians of Alola being that Z move, going through Protect, getting the extra bit of chip that allows the Nature's Madness plus Iron Head still get the KO. So we kind of wind up at the same position at the end of turn 2 as we could have been at the end of turn 1 without the double Protect. But now you do have to deal with the Xerneas up against the Fake Out, up against the option of Incineroar going for the Dark offense against Metagross to try to get it off the field. And so it's going to be interesting to see this race for whether Xerneas can kind of burn through a lot of these health bars on Joseph's side, or if this Iron Head can land into the Xerneas before that.
Yeah, no fake out either this turn. Instead, Moonblast immediately going to target down that Tapu Koko, probably looking to shut down any option of a Light Screen from that Pokemon. Iron Head free to connect with that Xerneas, but thanks to the Intimidate, it's going to be reduced to a 2-hit knockout, and Incineroar going for a roll Roar, going to force that Mega Metagross off the field, bring in the Incineroar on Joseph's side of the field, and now he has the opportunity to decide what Pokemon he wants to pair with it. He does have Fake Out available to him, so if Joseph wants, something like a Fake Out Stomping Tantrum would deal a ton of damage to the opposing Incineroar.
Yeah, or just going back on the offensive against the Xerneas. The Intimidate on the Metagross was another big difference between the Guardians of Alola and Nature's Madness play. He was forced to Mega Evolve in order to get the KO with the Iron Head on the Amoonguss, which meant when that Incineroar came in, he got intimidated instead of just getting clear body. But then that Roar comes in and just resets the Intimidate for him, lets Metagross come back in, still healthy, unintimidated. Really ended up just being helpful for Joe there.
Yeah, the Roar there was very interesting from Steven. You have to wonder what he was hoping for, because having the Intimidate down on that Mega Metagross was really, I think, one of the best positions he could have been in at the end of that turn. And as a result, I think he's almost forced to switch in this Kyogre here so that the Incineroar can then come in again later and reset that Intimidate again onto the Mega Metagross and also the Incineroar as well. Xerneas going to protect this turn as Incineroar on Joseph's side of the field will target a Fake Out into that Kyogre, but Iron Head will not connect with the Xerneas.
Yeah, and so Xerneas protects itself through the Fake Out turn. Kyogre managed to find a way to get onto the field and provide even more offensive pressure. Now, if you do land the Iron Head into Xerneas, yes, you've gotten rid of the Geomancy, you're probably taking a nearly full health Water Spout into both of these Pokemon in exchange, and that's kind of an awful trade. So the great thing that pairing this Kyogre with all of its damage output next to the Xerneas with its boost does, it's two big problems that you can't deal with at once in a lot of scenarios, and this is exactly that. You've got to kind of pick your poison, and both poisons are pretty bad.
Yeah, both options aren't great, but Joseph isn't out of doesn't have all of his options removed from him yet. He can switch a Pokemon here, and it looks like he brought his own Groudon. Yeah. So bringing in the Sunlight will mitigate any of Kyogre's super powerful rain-boosted water-type attacks that it could be threatening the field with. We'll still have to worry about that Xerneas dealing damage, but even a Moonblast from a Geomancy Xerneas is not going to be dealing the maximum possible damage to these Pokemon that resist the Fairy-type attacks. The big question on my mind is whether or not this Kyogre called the Groudon switch-in and will go for something like a Ice Beam. Moonblast will connect with the Groudon, bringing it down to just below half of its health. Metagross finally free to throw that Iron Head into the Xerneas for the KO, and Kyogre, one of the last two Pokemon remaining on the field for Steven right now, goes for a Water Spout, which is just gone. Evaporates even. Yeah,
Joe preserving the knowledge of that fourth Pokemon and the timing to switch in Groudon perfectly so that he can negate both big offensive options at once. Both getting in the Groudon as another thing that can take a Moonblast. Both things there didn't mind too much taking a big Fairy attack from that Xerneas. And then, of course, negating the Water Spout. That means Metagross continues to stay at 100% health here. And now you have the Sun locked in. Kyogre, down to the last two Pokemon, will have to stay on the field. It's never going to get its rain back, so it's going to be forced to Ice Beam its way through the rest of this game.
And what I find super interesting is we saw Joseph make the same play in Game 3 of his top 8 match, which actually ended up winning him that round. So just very smart, saving that Groudon until the exact moment he needs to play it. We'll have to see if this Metagross is going to be the Pokemon to come in and clean things up, or if it's going to be the Incineroar on Joseph's side of the field. Ice Beam into the protecting Groudon, and Steven with his own Incineroar targeting down the opposing Incineroar with a Flare Blitz. But thanks to the Intimidate and the type resistance, and just honestly the natural bulk of that Incineroar, it doesn't do much damage at all.
Yeah, it may take a few turns here as both of these Incineroars don't offer
at least,
much
honestly.
damage output, but they are pretty evenly matched, so eventually you'd expect them to kind of negate each other, and there's not too much going on for Steven's side. I think in this game, if it's going to play out, the Xerneas always comes on the field and tries to exert the early pressure. That means Pokemon start falling pretty quickly. Steven has to sacrifice Pokemon in order to get the Geomancy. Joe has to sacrifice Pokemon in order to deal with the Xerneas. Things start to simplify quickly, and one of the players will be forced to put their Primal onto the field first. And that's a really bad position to be in, because as soon as you've committed your Primal to the field, your opponent can follow up, commit theirs, and take that advantage. And if the game has already simplified to the point there's only 2 or 3 Pokemon left on either side, then there's not these long positional plays where you go back out of the Primal, back into it, and out, in. And so that very first position, like we see here, where the Kyogre came in, the Groudon came in once, and that will, there's a good chance that's it for the rest of the game, and it decides the game. And so both players are going to have to be very careful to preserve their Primal from being on the field for as long as possible, and then try to force their opponents to commit their primals to the field.
Yeah, well, a good preservation play by Joseph there, using Protect and taking both the attacks from the Kyogre and the Incineroar on Steven's side of the field. A good piece of information was revealed in the previous turn that I just want to highlight before we go into Game 2. The Groudon on Joseph's side of the field is a special Groudon. We saw it target a Earth Power into the Incineroar on Steven's side of the field and just barely miss a KO. So great information as this game plays out. Joseph correctly keeping that Groudon around for one more turn, knowing that the combination of the Ice Beam and the Flare Blitz damage would have probably been enough to knock it out, and just trying to go for a double Protect, just to make sure that this Mega Metagross should be able to clean things up and bring us into Game 2.
Yeah, the special Groudon is really important because its matchup against Kyogre is pretty poor, and so especially if it has to try to play in the rain, it can't just try to find a single turn to sneak in a Precipice Blades that does a massive amount of damage and kind of balances things out. It needs several turns, and it needs its partners to be helping it to actually get through that big special defense stat on Kyogre. And so a lot of times we think of the weather matchup just being about Kyogre needs its, Groudon can kind of play in either, just can only play defense in one.
Yeah.
But with the special Groudon, you're more reliant on needing to play the defense to be able to play any of the offense. And so you have to stay on the field a long time, and so you need to be in the sun.
Yeah, and one thing I'm super curious about in this matchup, and I'm not sure if we'll see it play out in Game 2, but going back to Joseph's top 8 match, we saw him sort of alternate between bringing the Groudon and bringing the Yveltal. I know that Yveltal's matchup isn't the best against Xerneas, especially knowing that Steven is prioritizing that mode of play where you have the Incineroar and the Amoonguss, and you try to find Xerneas any opening it can to get that Geomancy and then go on the offensive. But if Joseph's able to pivot somehow and sort of catch his opponent off guard, like we saw in top 8, I think that's going to be very difficult for Steven, because even though he has access to Kangaskhan and Tornadus, which on their own are a super powerful lead, I don't think those are the Pokemon that he's looking to win this game for him and bring him into finals.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see if either player feels comfortable adjusting away, because I think any adjustment away from these 4 that they're bringing carries a lot of risk with it, because the tools that those Pokemon are providing are all critical. You look at the Tapu Koko and you need the Electric Terrain. You look at the Metagross and you need the Iron Head. You look at the Groudon and you need the Sun, right?
Yeah.
It's the most crucial thing.
Yeah, well, it looks like we have same leads and a same opening play from Steven in this Game 2 top 4 match. Double Protect, both the Xerneas and the Amoonguss using it. The Tapu Koko, again, going for the Guardians of Alola Z move. If it targets down that Amoonguss again, we will know that all it'll take will be another Nature's Madness and an Iron Head to go ahead and get the knockout.
Yeah, it's interesting. Both players kind of so far sticking to the same script, and you can maybe make sense of why. Steven sees it as he got the Geomancy on turn 2 from a full health, but it's different this time.
It is.
Xerneas getting some extra chip, identifying that just maybe a little bit more damage on Xerneas is going to be helpful.
And you have to wonder if that little bit of damage is going to be the difference between a intimidated Mega Metagross Iron Head being able to knock out that Xerneas or not. I think that Steven has a pretty safe switch into the Incineroar here if he wants to take it. But, knowing that it was the combination of the Z-move into Protect, Nature's Madness, and Iron Head that knocked out that Amoonguss this time around, maybe he's hoping for a little bit of a different damage roll here this turn, as he will redirect all attacks with the Rage Powder. If Amoonguss is able to hold on, that'll give Xerneas the opportunity to go for a Moonblast into one of these Pokemon, and it's just barely able to get there.
That's a huge difference in the game, because the extra turn of redirection can really give Xerneas that extra bit of staying power it needs to not get immediately threatened with both the Groudon switch in and the Iron Head.
Yeah,
and outside of that small adjustment, you can see why both players would stick there, because Steven did get his Geomancy in the last game, and then Joe ended up winning the game, so they can both feel somewhat comfortable with that opening, and so we get this very similar opening that, like in the last match, tilts slightly in a different player's advantage, as Steven has the extra tiny health Amoonguss sitting on the field.
Yeah, I do like how Joseph is switching out the Mega Metagross here, sending the Incineroar out onto the field in its place, keeping that Pokemon safe for later. And I think this Mega Metagross is really the key Pokemon on Joseph's side of the field to go on the offensive, just given how he's been playing the Groudon and that Tapu Koko very defensively moving forward. Tapu Koko going to protect itself this turn. Only Incineroar is vulnerable to an attack. It will be taking a Moonblast from that Xerneas, but again, just not enough to get that KO. And gives itself the opportunity to go for a Fake Out, which could either stop this Amoonguss or this Xerneas from attacking this turn.
Yeah, but likely if you Fake Out, if you stop the Xerneas, you can probably eliminate the Amoonguss, but it could just protect or switch, and if you don't Fake Out the Xerneas, you're probably just taking a Moonblast on Tapu Koko.
But if Joseph is able to correctly target the Fake Out this turn and give Tapu Koko the opportunity to go for something like a Light Screen, we could be looking at a very different game too. Fake Out will connect with that Xerneas, no Protect, and Tapu Koko does go for the Light Screen. So Joseph has bought himself a little bit of time. It's possible that those Moonblasts won't be enough to necessarily pick up those KOs at this point in time, and as a result, he might be able to find a way back in this game.
Yeah, not just the Moonblast into something like the Tapu Koko. They'll no longer KO. The damage outlook for something like Kyogre versus Metagross changes a lot, too, in a way that's really beneficial for Joe.
So no Fake Out from the Metagross on Steven's side of the field. Tapu Koko takes a ton of damage from that Moonblast, but it is not enough to get a knockout. Nature's Madness will bring Xerneas down to about 40% of its health, and it looks like we might be seeing a trade of U-turns here as Steven's Incineroar retreats into his party, potentially trying to get the Amoonguss back out onto the field to give Xerneas, again, more time to just deal damage throughout all of these light screen turns. But if this Metagross makes an appearance here, the Tapu Koko might... It's a tough spot, I think, for Joe. These Pokemon are so close to getting knocked out.
Yeah, Metagross hits the field in a pretty similar position to where we were at 2 turns ago, but now with the light screen up. You're still probably just going to have anything Metagross does redirected into Amoonguss, while Xerneas can just target down the Tapu Koko and prevent it from dealing with Amoonguss. But now, Xerneas is much lower, so you are only looking to land one Steel attack into Xerneas, and with the light screen up, you're not so worried about having to take a Dazzling Gleam with Metagross just to attack Amoonguss.
Yeah, and I don't think Tapu Koko could have done enough damage to knock out that Amoonguss anyways, since Nature's Madness will not get a KO this turn, and then there's no electric terrain up on the field for something like a Volt Switch. Switching in the Incineroar here is a bit of a risk because, yes, it does get an Intimidate down on the field, but these aren't the Pokemon you want to be intimidating, and as a result, you're losing the opportunity to go for a Fake Out next turn. Metagross forced to target that Amoonguss with a Iron Head for the KO, but again, a very interesting switch from Joseph there. Well, you would have thought the Fake Out would have had more utility later on in this game.
Yeah, he's basically there deciding that he prefers to have Tapu Koko later into the game, and if you think about the Kyogre he's going to have to deal with at some point, the Incineroar is going to offer very little against it. The Tapu Koko might offer another big damage output against it. And that could make all the difference.
But Tapu Koko...
something was going down to Dazzling Gleam there.
Something was going down to Dazzling Gleam, but Tapu Koko is still in a very tough spot this turn. It is one hit away from getting knocked out. Either this Incineroar or the Xerneas should be able to clean it up at this point. So forced to protect this turn to not take damage from Fake Out, and then Dazzling Gleam will just clean it up.
Yeah, so if we look forward, maybe he still needs to protect Tapu Koko, and so he protects this turn, looks to switch next turn, but that switch would be into Groudon.
Yes.
And that would be him failing that test of being the first one to force his Primal onto the field while the Xerneas and the Incineroar sit there comfortably, and that would be the huge gap. The small pieces finally forming into a huge gap since the last game.
Yeah, I like how Steven has sort of called the fact that this is how Joseph has been deciding to play this game, also relying on his support Pokemon as well, and just trying to delay that Kyogre from making an appearance, if that is his last Pokemon, for as long as possible. Fake Out from that Incineroar, targeting the protecting Metagross, and Dazzling Gleam trying to knock out that Tapu Koko will not connect thanks to a Protect.
Yeah, and so now the position is here. The Dazzling Gleam's going to come out and either KO the Tapu Koko, or Groudon's going to be on the field. If it KOs the Tapu Koko, then Groudon winds up on the field. So either way, that will be the first Primal onto the field. Metagross should get its chance to KO Xerneas in exchange, but it's going to take another big Dark move or a U-turn from the Incineroar. The U-turn's risky because if it's not the switch, then that would actually be Kyogre coming out first, so I think we'll likely just see some Dark move to start picking up some of the damage onto the Metagross. Also, Incineroar pretty healthy here, not worrying about too much, knowing that Metagross can't at all think about going for Stomping Tantrums yet, while it has to worry about this Xerneas.
You have to wonder, though, this is a very interesting play here. We are going to see that Tapu Koko retreat and the Groudon take its place onto the field. So Joseph, sort of giving up that advantage he had earlier on in Game 1, like you were saying, being forced to bring out his Primal very early on, making the clear distinction that Tapu Koko is the Pokemon he wants to preserve so that he can do something against this presumably Kyogre in the back of Steven's party. Dazzling Gleam will connect with both Pokemon onto the field. Doesn't deal any damage to either of these Pokemon. An Iron Head from that Metagross, though, will get that knockout onto the Xerneas, and it's down to this Incineroar to target down one of these Pokemon, either a U-turn or a Flare Blitz from that Incineroar into the Metagross would be a great play here, as it's removed from the field.
Yeah, just a little bit extra there, making sure to get rid of the Metagross, and now down to 2 Pokemon for Joe. There's going to be no chance for this Groudon to leave the field. And also down to 2 Pokemon on Stevens, but timed so that this 2-on-2 matchup sees the weather as rain. This Tapu Koko, we've seen it be more defensive, doing Tapunium Z, not Electrium Z, seeing it do Light Screen. Shouldn't have the damage output to deal with this full health Kyogre on its own. At some point, that Origin Pulse is going to land and just KO both of these Pokemon.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me that we saw the Flare Blitz from that Incineroar there, just going for really big damage down onto that Metagross. And I think that's something that Joseph is going to have to be careful of moving forwards. I mean, not that the Incineroar really needed the boost from the harsh sunlight in order to get that KO, but just something that he's going to have to juggle in terms of board position going into Game 3.
We've also seen 4 moves now. We've seen the U-turn, the Flare Blitz, the Roar, and the Fake Out. And so no dark move at all makes this dealing with this Metagross, if the weather is rain, slightly difficult. Which puts even more pressure on Steven to not bring out his Kyogre until very late into the game. When he does this, and Kyogre hits the field at this timing, it's a win. When he does what happened in the last game, it's not. I think the big difference in this game was that Amoonguss surviving. Even though the way the game extended after the Amoonguss survived allowed Light Screen to go up, allowed things to have more staying power, eventually it boiled down to a really important extra redirection of a Steel move into the Amoonguss that bought the time to force Groudon onto the field.
Yeah, one piece of information we did get as this Game 2 closes out in Steven's favor was that Tapu Koko's Volt Switch boosted by the Electric Terrain did enough for about 50% of Kyogre's health. So that's good for Joseph to know, because as we go into Game 3, not only is I think he's going to be try to fish for that big damage onto the Amoonguss again, just so he can KO it in that one turn after the Protect, but also maybe try and get a little bit of chip down on that Kyogre if it does make an early appearance, so that Tapu Koko, if that is the Pokemon he decides to keep around, which I'm not sure is the best optimization for him in this matchup, can pick up the knockout and hopefully win him this game.
It's difficult because he has to identify a way to do damage to Kyogre. I think in most matchups with Kyogre, he'd like to deal with it using the Eviltal. Can snarl it, can exchange damage very well with it. But with Eviltal off the board, Groudon with Earth Power is not an option. Venusaur, when you're not trying to play in the sun, not an option. You win already if it's sunny, so what's the point of trying to win with Venusaur? Incineroar is not an option. Metagross, we see its best damage output is Stomping Tantrum. That's not an option. So if you're not going to have sun, your only chance to get big damage is that Volt Switch, and so it becomes pivotal that he keeps it around. The problem is he's forced to also feed it because he has to not have this Amoonguss able to Spore.
Yeah, and it looks like we are seeing an adjustment into the Venusaur this time around from Joseph. Venusaur and Tapu Koko is going to be that lead, getting the Electric Terrain up immediately, so no Spores or Sleep Powders active on the field.
Yeah, so I talked about this negatively a second ago with Venusaur because it doesn't help you as much with Kyogre, but I think it can help you a lot right here because it can't be Rage Powder. This is a chance to start getting some Sludge Bombs, some earlier chip, and say, I'm not going to try to exchange Amoonguss for Geomancy and then or miss that exchange and lose. I'm going to try to work my way past the Amoonguss and deal with both problems at once. And then it does give you another damage output. It maybe becomes less pivotal to save Tapu Koko if you think there's a way you can position where the Venusaur can land a Grass Knot into the Kyogre.
It looks like the Xerneas isn't even going to try and get a Geomancy up this turn. Incineroar taking the field in its place. Tapu Koko immediately getting that light screen set up onto the field. Venusaur left going for a Sludge Bomb into that Incineroar for a nice amount of damage, and Clear Smog from that Amoonguss into the Venusaur to potentially break a Focus Sash or, whatever item that this Venusaur is holding. It's clearly not Life Orb, so you have to think it's Focus Sash.
Yeah, definitely to break a Focus Sash. There's no boosting move coming out, and so you just want to make sure that when you do land something into this Venusaur, it's a one-hit KO. That's maybe something so late as like an Ice Beam from a Kyogre to prevent a Grass Knot from coming in, but it's just a useful thing to get. Could be a Flare Blitz right now also.
And the Amoonguss is going to redirect attention from Tapu Koko into it as we see the Guardian of Alola Z move activate once again. No Protect this time, though, so the Amoonguss is going to be dropped down immediately to 25% of its remaining health.
Yeah, and clearly, since the redirection came from Amoonguss that could only target Tapu Koko, and this is the most likely thing for Tapu Koko to go, this is something Steven wants. He's preferring here that the Amoonguss takes the Guardian of Alola and the Incineroar stays very healthy. Make sure that that Incineroar can probably land a Flare Blitz this turn to just knock out that Venusaur and solve that problem. You run the risk of something like the Guardian of Alola plus a Sludge Bomb just knocking out Venusaur otherwise.
Yeah, and you do have to wonder about this Venusaur, what Pokemon it took a position for on Joseph's side of the field. We do see this Flare Blitz connect with it, so we will get to see one of Joseph's other Pokemon moving forwards, and that crit on the Sludge Bomb into that Flare Blitz actually a big deal, as the recoil damage is enough to knock it out. Depending on how Joseph adjusted the Pokemon he brought into this game, this could be a great opportunity for something like the Metagross to come in and, again, immediately threaten down that Xerneas and the Amoonguss at the same time.
Yeah, and Incineroar is going to be the one left behind, identifying that it kind of doesn't provide enough against the Xerneas and becomes a problem if it's left against the Kyogre, and so instead the Venusaur was going to offer more, and it already has, because it forced some of these early changes to be juggled. And so if we consider these are the Pokemon that were led in both games 1 and 2, they're both on the field up against each other, but now it's very different, as Amoonguss is already at very low health. And so you don't have these issues of worrying about spending 2 or 3 attacks just to get through the Rage Powder before you can get to the Xerneas. Joseph's going to be at that Xerneas immediately.
And Mega Metagross is free to immediately take the field, with the Mega Evolution, because of the fact that Intimidate on Steven's side of the field has been removed, thanks to that Incineroar knockout. Xerneas not going for the Geomancy this turn. Instead, we're seeing both these Pokemon protect again, probably just trying to see, what Joseph is thinking in terms of who's targeting with what. Nature's Madness into that Amoonguss, Ironhead as well into the Amoonguss. So Joseph just looking to remove it from the field and probably begin to try and force out really the final Pokemon that Steven has, because if it's that Kyogre, Groudon coming in on the field would be huge.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting here because the Rage Powder is going to be forced to come out to solve the Geomancy. The Nature's Madness probably just fishing for Kyogre to come in even earlier, so the option that it would come back into the back, because otherwise you just get the... Oh, wow, really looking for the Kyogre to come in there, not going for the light screen.
Yeah, not going for the light screen, but could potentially have the opportunity to go for one later. Really, I think the key point here is that the Stomping Tantrum was able to connect with the Amoonguss and get that KO, and the Tapu Koko is still on the field at full health, so we could very easily see Joseph manually switch it out like we saw in Game 1, send in that Groudon, assuming Steven's last Pokemon is that Kyogre, and then start going for Ironhead or Stomping Tantrum into, either of the Pokemon on the field.
I mean, that's absolutely the play now. This is what Joseph has been able to force. There is no counterplay for Steven from the Groudon just coming in, maybe forcing Ice Beam, gating any massive damage output from this Kyogre, and then neither of these Pokemon can then deal with Metagross fast enough.
And it's not intimidated as well, so those Iron Heads are going to be huge.
Right, so repeated Ice and Fairy attacks are going to take a while to lose Metagross. Meanwhile, it's going to have plenty of time to beat Xerneas, and then because Tapu Koko is about to switch out here, we saw how much that Volt Switch did when Kyogre is having to play in the sun, worrying about that Volt Switch. Electric Train probably also about to expire, so it should be time that the Electric Train is back on by the time Tapu Koko hits the field again. It's going to all come together really nicely for Joe to just have left these 2 big damage threats stranded on the field by themselves with no support, and with him still having plenty of damage output against them. Still lots that could change between now and then, but that looks like it's how it's going to wrap up.
Yeah, and just a great adjustment from Joseph as well, going from Game 2 into Game 3, really acknowledging the fact that targeting the Xerneas with the Guardian of Alola Z move just was not the optimal play to be making there. And properly ensuring that the right amount of damage was put down, not only on the Amoonguss, but on the Incineroar as well, so that this Metagross could come in now that its threats have really been managed and clean up. Groudon will take the field, will bring with it the harsh sunlight as Moonblast from that Xerneas targets down the Groudon. We saw this in Game 1. It's not very effective, does not deal a lot of damage. Iron Head does connect with that Xerneas, and it is a one-hit knockout without the Intimidate from that Incineroar. So again, very well managed board positioning from Joseph in this Game 3. Ice Beam will connect with the Groudon. Light Screen does go away, but still just with a 3-on-1 situation where one of those Pokemon is Tapu Koko, the Metagross doesn't even have to stay on the field anymore.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, Kyogre playing in the sun, having to Ice Beam its way through a Metagross, through a Tapu Koko, through a Groudon, it's just too much. And you can really see how strong that adjustment was, where the Venusaur was able to really turn that game on its head. Pokemon that is mostly there to get the chlorophyll support and try to play in the sun when Joe is able to more quickly go into the sun mode, but he found a way to get good value out of the Venusaur replacing the Incineroar, even though Venusaur was never going to get to see the sun. It never got to get the chlorophyll boost. It had to just play as a normal, slow Venusaur. But because of the way it could work around the Rage Powder and draw the attention of something like the Incineroar and get one of those KOs earlier, right? Both of those things made a big difference with the Geomancy delayed, and then because Incineroar went down quickly, when Amoonguss was sacrificed to get the Geomancy up, that only left 2 Pokemon, which from the beginning was always the key to the game. The first person to 2 Pokemon and the Primal on the field was going to lose.
Yeah, and that's a nice throwback too to the traditional way that a lot of these Primal Pokemon have matched up against each other, or even Sun versus Rain. You know, the last weather standing is really the one that's going to have that advantage moving forwards in the matchup. So again, really well managed by Joseph. We'll have to see how that works out for him going into finals though, because he's going to be facing down Bingji's Palkia team, which is, I don't know what I think about this matchup. It's going to be very interesting, because looking at Joseph's team on paper, I don't think he has too much to stop something like the Trick Room from just running rampant.
I think it's actually a really poor matchup for him. If you look at his team, his damage outputs for the Palkia are really poor. No super effective moves at all, I don't think. Groudon, because it's special, has to deal with the massive special defense stat of that Palkia. It's going to take a long time to get through it. The Metagross, we saw what it can do to water types in that Stomping Tantrum versus Kyogre in the last game. Those Pokemon are going to take a long time to actually break through the Palkia. In the meantime, the Palkia, it's up against something like the Groudon. The advantage that he will have is the Rayquaza to negate the sun and kind of at any point sneak in that Palkia water move that KOs Groudon. So it's going to be a really tricky matchup for Joe to both find a way to stop the Trick Room and stop that offense under the Trick Room from overwhelming him, and ever play the offense himself to actually break through the Palkia and not just have it sit on the field endlessly.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to take a little bit of a break as these trainers get ready for the finals here in Portland. We'll be back in about 10 minutes, so please, set a little reminder on your phone, maybe get some popcorn, a snack, a drink, stay hydrated, all that good stuff, and we'll be back in 10 minutes, so please stay tuned.